To all the drivers out there delivering holiday cheer across our great country, season's greetings and a huge thank you from the Allen Lund Company.
OOIDA, representing America's truckers since 1973, presents Landline Now with your host, Mark Reddick.
The OOIDA Foundation is asking truckers to take part in two surveys on significant issues in the trucking industry: detention time and freight rates. I'll find out what they're asking and why from Andrew King of the OOIDA Foundation. Plenty of truckers have been in the position of fighting a ticket that they think they don't deserve. But the old expression tells us that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, and keeping yourself ticket-free is something that can be done. So what are the most easily avoided tickets out there? I'll get a rundown on that and more from David Grimes and Alex Clark of CDL Legal. And finally, North Carolina is increasing the penalties for taking part in cargo theft, while California's governor has said no to a truck driver training grant program. Scott Thompson gets the details on both from our state legislative expert, Keith Goebel. But first, the news with Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Mark. It's more of the same when it comes to diesel prices. Both the weekly EIA report and daily ProMiles report show prices on the decline. The Energy Information Administration says a national average dipped by more than a nickel last week to $4.09 a gallon. That marks 6 straight weeks of declines on the EIA report, over which time the average has fallen by more than 45 cents. 8 of the 10 regions on the survey recorded price drops, the only exceptions being the East Coast and Lower Atlantic. ProMiles says the trend continues this week. They had Tuesday morning's average at $4.14 nationally, down about 4 cents compared to a week ago. The ProMiles survey also has prices up in just 2 regions, the same 2 regions EIA does, the East Coast and Lower Atlantic. After an historically slow Thanksgiving weekend, loads on the spot market are increasing to a more normal level. Landline Now's Ashley Blackford has the details.
The number of loads on the DAT load board increased last week to more than 1.3 million. Robert Rao says this is the largest weekly volume in the last month.
National benchmark broker to carrier spot rates without fuel increased by 4 cents per mile for both dry vans and flatbeds. Dry van line haul rates have increased by just over 10 cents per mile in the last 2 weeks, up to $1.67 per mile. And at $1.91 per mile, flatbed line haul rates are the highest in the last 2 months. Following a month of gains in the lead up to Thanksgiving, reefer spot rates cooled off a little bit following seasonal trends, dropping by about a penny per mile to a national average of $1.99 per mile last week. And lastly, the national diesel price continues to drop this week by another 5 cents per gallon. That's all the way down to $4.09. If diesel continues dropping through December like it usually does this time of year, we may see diesel get back under that $4 mark before the start of the new year.
Rouse says that carrier equipment posts increased by 16% week over week as drivers return to the market, resulting in last week's dry van load-to-truck ratio increasing to 3.64. For Landline Now, I'm Ashley Blackford.
Thanks, Ashley. The Florida Department of Highway Safety and Motor Vehicles is asking FMCSA for a pass on certain CDL skills test requirements. The agency's request was published in the Federal Register on Tuesday. Current regulations require the 3-part CDL skills test to be administered and successfully completed in the following order: pre-trip inspection, basic vehicle control skills, and on-road skills. The Florida agency wants FMCSA to grant a tester the discretion to continue testing an applicant who fails the pre-trip inspection or basic vehicle control segments of the test. They'd also like the option of allowing the applicant to come back at a later date to retake the failed segments. The agency says the exemption would increase efficiency and not compromise safety. FMCSA is giving the public 30 days to comment on the request. The auctioning off of yellow terminals nationwide has begun. A filing in a Delaware court shows that a number of carriers spent more than $1.8 billion buying up more than 125 terminals over the past week. XPO, Estes Express Lines, Saia, and Knight Swift bought up the majority of those. XPO, in fact, shelled out the bulk of that total, spending $870 million to purchase 28 terminals. The selling off of yellow terminals is a means of paying off the now-defunct company's creditors. There are still several dozen yellow properties yet to be sold off, and there's also the matter of tens of thousands of yellow tractors and trailers, which are being sold through auction houses. California regulators are still digging into an October crash involving a pedestrian and cruise robotaxi. The California Public Utilities Commission has called a hearing for February and says cruise reps must show up to explain why the company shouldn't be fined for, quote, making misleading public comments. The pedestrian crash is what led regulators to eventually suspend Cruise's license in the state, but there have been other incidents as well. The California Public Utilities Commission says Cruise could end up being fined $100,000 each time the company failed to disclose information to regulators about a crash. The October crash led to a number of consequences for Cruise, which in recent weeks has sidelined all of its robotaxis and had its CEO resign. A new report from AAA likely confirms what you've been seeing out on the roadways, that more and more people are engaging in risky driving behaviors. In fact, AAA says 60% of drivers are behaving badly behind the wheel, whether it be speeding, driving distracted, or driving aggressively. And that's despite most knowing what actions are dangerous. Roughly 93% of drivers polled identified texting, emailing, and reading on a handheld cell phone while driving to be very or extremely dangerous. The company polled about 2,500 people to come up with the results. On average, the most dangerous drivers were about 40 years old and male. ABF Freight is likely on the hook for a diesel spill in Ohio. WHIO-TV reports the Ohio Environmental Protection Agency found that more than 5,000 gallons of fuel had leaked from a facility in Huber Heights last week. ABF Freight was issued a citation for the spill, which affected a nearby waterway that leads into a creek. The Ohio EPA says they will continue to monitor the situation as their investigation gets started. The truck parking shortage is not quite as bad as it was 2 years ago. That's one takeaway from a new survey from Trucker Path. On average, professional truck drivers said there were many spaces available 64% of the time between 11 a.m. and 2 p.m. and 38% of the time between 7 and 10 p.m. Both numbers are up roughly 20 percentage points compared to late 2021. The Trucker Path survey also looks at regional differences. Massachusetts had the least truck parking availability on average. Montana had the most, followed by the two Dakotas. The overall survey suggests that progress is being made with regard to the truck parking crisis, but it's still a problem, obviously. That's why the Truck Parking Safety Improvement Act remains a priority in Congress. The bill, introduced in both the House and the Senate, would allocate $755 million over 3 years for the construction of free, publicly available truck parking lots. For more information on that, check out fightingfortruckers.com. 2 new Sheetz locations have added several dozen truck parking spaces to the areas they now call home. The new store in Prince George County, Virginia, located off Interstate 295, includes 25 free truck parking spots. The other in Mount Airy, North Carolina, off Interstate 77, has 50 spaces. The Sheetz locations are the 39th and 40th within the chain to include truck diesel fuel lanes. And finally, Washington State is sounding the alarm about the state of its rest areas. A new report from the Washington State DOT shows that 87% of the buildings at all 47 state-owned rest areas in the state are in critical condition. The agency lays out a plan for fixing the problems, which would cost upwards of $500 million over the next 15 years. The plan does not call for adding or closing any existing rest areas. The Washington State DOT says it's been about 15 years since they've updated their strategic plan for rest areas, and they're in the process of updating it now. That's Landline Now News for today. I'm Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Scott. Next, I'll discuss surveys on detention time and rates with Andrew King of the OOIDA Foundation, and I'll cover easily avoided tickets with the folks from CDL Legal. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
Control your toll costs and eliminate tolling headaches with Prepass Tolls. Prepass Tolls means toll volume discounts. Just one invoice for all tolls and fewer violations. Call 877-878-5970 or go to prepass.com.
Attention all truckers, Dean Michael, the tax doctor here. I want to talk to you about those dreaded tax problems. I know you want to keep on trucking and not even think about them, but let's face it, they're not going away all on their own. You need professional help. I've been helping truckers put their tax problems in the rearview mirror for years. I can help you too. Call me now for a free consultation at 888-557-4020 or go to mytaxhelpmd.com. It's like I always say, keep your eyes on the road, I'll keep mine on the IRS. 888-557-4020.
It's tested and proven. Burn 2.1% less fuel when you balance all wheel ends with Centromatic. Call 800-523-8473 to get the OOIDA discount.
Landline now. Welcome back. The OOIDA Foundation is asking truckers to take part in 2 surveys on significant issues in the trucking industry. Here to talk about both surveys is Andrew King of the OOIDA Foundation. Andrew, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start with the detention time survey. First of all, why is the foundation conducting a survey about this particular issue?
Well, this is obviously a big one, as most of our members will know, I'm sure. They've probably endured it a few times in their career. It's been something that's been on the radar for quite a while, but in 2015 in the FAST Act, there was a section of that bill that actually required a study to be done on detention, and that study kind of came out in 2018, but that kind of started this movement of studying it, and not just industry studying it, but also the government agency studying it. And in fact, there is an ongoing study going on right now that FMCSA is in charge of, and that's kind of progressing slowly. Unfortunately, they take a couple years to really implement. But they have reached out to OOIDA on a number of occasions, and this is where this data is really, really important. So we survey our members, asking them questions about hours of service and detention and what they experience, and not just how it impacts them in that way, but also financially and safety. And then we use that information, we're able to share it, and that really has been beneficial for advancing this cause, especially to improve detention time or find some way to kind of mitigate it. I mean, even the recent bills there on the Fair Labor Standards Act, we asked that question of our members before we even started initiating that. What do you think of this? Do you think it'll work? That sort of thing.
Who are you looking to have take part? Are you looking for a specific segment of trucking, or is this all truckers?
Yeah, all truckers. So we send it to a number of members. We basically, not to get too much into the weeds, but we have a methodology for selecting members to make sure that it's representative of the membership as a whole, and then we email that out. So that's owner-operators who are leased on. Those are under their own authority, small fleet owners, company drivers. We want everyone's opinion and view, experience of detention time, because we know that it impacts people differently depending on even what you haul or what area of the country you're running in or what type of shippers and receivers that you're working with. All that makes an impact and difference on detention. And so if we can gather all that information, the better for getting this issue in front of lawmakers and regulators.
So what are some of the key questions that you're asking truckers in this survey?
Well, one that doesn't necessarily maybe make sense at first, but it does in the analysis part, and that is, what kind of hours of service do you operate in? Are you doing 60 hours in 7 days, or are you doing 70 hours in 8 days? And one of the reasons why we ask that, and the vast majority, of course, are going to be 70 hours, but that really determines how many hours you can drive, you can work within a week. And so if you spend a certain amount of time at a loading facility or unloading facility, then you are basically losing a good chunk of your hours of service. And so we ask that as kind of an initial question, but then we ask, and probably the most important is, how much detention do you experience per week, loading and unloading? And those are actually 2 separate questions, so we can kind of get both ends there on how much time is really being taken up. And then we also ask, what do you think would be a fair rate of compensation for detention time? And then what do you actually receive? So you can see the difference between the two, because we know that people do receive some detention pay sometimes, not always, not for every load, but there are times when they do. And we also want to know, okay, you get pay, but is that compensation enough to make up for the time that you spent waiting? because we know that you have a schedule, you have loads ahead, and maybe you're not able to meet some of those appointments. Maybe you miss opportunities because you were held up in detention. And sometimes I feel like in other studies, that part is not captured. And so that's something that we ask that I feel is so important, because it really shows how this is not just a productivity thing, a financial thing, but that can really work into a safety issue. Because if you are feeling like, oh, I've missed all these loads, I got to make up time. Even if I'm operating within the hours of service, I might push harder when I'm tired because I have to get there. I can't miss this. And so that really helps to capture that.
One of the things I noticed you asked truckers is how to best define detention time. And that may seem obvious to a lot of people, but what definition is currently kind of accepted in the industry, and what have truckers said in the past that they think it should be?
Yes. So I'm not sure how this got said. I think it had something to do with there was a period of time around deregulation where actually detention was regulated. And I think maybe that's where this standard industry definition of 2 hours of dwell time. So a lot of people will say that first 2 hours that you spend is free, I guess. And everything after that is what we would consider detention. Well, we really want to know our members' opinions of that, because obviously there's a lot of truckers in OOIDA and have a lot of experience, and we tend to feel that that's not how it should be. And so we want to know, what do our members feel about that? So we ask them, do you accept that standard traditional definition, and do you want OOIDA to try to tear that down? And I mean, the vast majority are yes, absolutely. And so you kind of get a range, but a lot of people say immediately, what job out there do you know that basically gives away time where you're not getting compensated, especially on piece rate pay, right? It doesn't make any sense. No one would stand for that. And yet in trucking, it is highly accepted, and so we want to fight against that. And then you have those who do recognize that depending on what you're hauling, there is some kind of leeway, to load or unload. And so they might say 30 minutes or an hour, but nothing more than an hour for sure are what our members have stated in the past. But I would say the vast majority of them would say as soon as you are there and you have an appointment time, you've gotten there on time, then that clock starts ticking right then, because you are using up part of their hours of service, what hours are available to them.
Have you done a survey like this before?
Yes, actually, we have done. This is going to be the 8th time we've done this. We do it annually around December. And so we have some historical data on this now as well, which is really helpful. So we'll keep doing the survey every year, and that information really helps us to watch how it changes over time.
Can you give us an idea of what some of the results have been from the past surveys?
Yeah, I mean, in general, people state they spend between 6 and 10 hours every week waiting to load and also waiting to unload, which is a massive amount of time. And then also one other thing that stands out to me is the average amount of loads that they lose per week, which is somewhere in the range of like 2 to 3 loads that they lose because of detention. So all this stuff adds up, and that's what we're always putting in front of lawmakers and regulators when we're talking about this issue, to say, hey, this is what's happening on the ground. This is what our members see, and that is really big.
Okay. What do you do with the data once you've got this thing put together?
Well, we usually put it into a draft report, and then we finalize it. We put it up on our website. And then, as I've mentioned already, we actually send that sometimes to FMCSA or other lawmakers and whatnot as we talk about this issue. We have our guys in D.C. who are often on the Hill talking to different congressmen and women about this issue, and it helps to have like a one-pager, like kind of summarizing some of what's going on and presenting that.
So how can people take part in this? I mean, how are you gathering people to take part?
So we formulated a batch basically of members who we have email addresses for and have not previously unsubscribed to surveys, and we emailed those out. And so they will receive this in their inbox. We send it out on December 1st, and the deadline is December 31st. So please, if you're listening to this, check your inbox, check your spam, potentially your junk folder. Sometimes it goes into that. And then you have a link, you can click on it, and it takes maybe 10, 15 minutes to fill out. And you also have the option to save and continue it later. if you, for some reason that's too much time. But we really, really would appreciate people's feedback on this because it is very helpful.
Okay. Let's talk about the other survey you've got out right now, which is the freight rate survey. This seems a little more straightforward in terms of what you're talking about. This is an annual survey, right?
Yes, and we do these in companion together. The detention and freight rate survey go out at the same time. However, you will not receive both surveys. You will only receive one or the other, and there's a potential, because it's probability. You might not receive either one, but this is something we do annually, and it is a little bit more straightforward. Of course, now we produce this monthly report and quarterly report on the market update, but this is really helpful for us because sometimes, what we're reporting on and those other things, they're high-level data. It's government data or maybe one specific company's data, and that might not necessarily be what's happening for our members. And so we want to get a better understanding of what's going on with them, their own personal experience, and we can use that to help fight against certain, let's say, arguments. For example, I'll give you one. Here, just recently, we have the Got Truckers Act, right? And ATA put out a number of statements trying to refute that. They're in opposition against it. And one thing they'd like to say is that, the pay for truck drivers, the average truck driver out there, is actually really well. And so we don't need this. We don't need something like that. Well, we have data to show that is not true. And obviously, the market goes in cycles. But not everyone is compensated to the level that they claim that they are. They're only surveying, a certain set of carriers, and they're not getting the industry as a whole. And so something like this is really helpful to say, hey, what you're saying is it's not true.
What are some of the key questions you're asking truckers to get at this information?
Biggest one here would be, what is the method of compensation? And then obviously, what is that compensation over the past year? Kind of what was your average? And then we ask some other general questions that are helpful on just what do you see things? Are freight rates going up? Are they going down? Are they going neutral? And the same with loads and miles. So we can track what's happening in the industry in that way. And then the last one I would mention, well, I guess two more. DAT puts out a lot of data, right, on spot and contract rates, but those are kind of averages. And so we ask, is this accurate for you? Is this what you're seeing out there? This is the numbers that they're putting out. Do you think this is too high, too low? And that kind of gives us a feel of, can we trust these numbers as being representative for our members, which is helpful. And then the other thing, last thing I'll mention is just, what do you plan on doing next year? Are you planning on making any changes? And to go into detail about that. So, you have members who are doing quite well, even in a downturn like we are right now, and they might be expanding where others are, I'm going to really control my deadhead miles or things like that. It's just kind of fascinating to see how they're running their operation, how they're trying to be more efficient.
What are some of the interesting things you learned from this survey in the past?
Well, just kind of interesting for me, being maybe more of a data nerd, is, the level of compensation and also how they see things going into the future. So we also ask them, how do you see rates down the line? And seeing how those match up. And this is before we had some of the other data points that we've been recently studying. And so it was super helpful for me, for us, to get a bigger picture of what's going on out there. Because there's a number of times that our government team and us have used this on comments when we're talking to people on the Hill, trying to get them an understanding of what happens, what's going on in the trucking world out there.
I assume that people can find this in their inbox as well if they're being asked to take part in the survey.
Yes, exactly. Same thing with the detention time survey, emailed out, and hopefully you check your inbox and see if you have one of those. And it's the same thing, 10, 15 minutes, and you can save and continue it on if you need to.
Okay. Andrew, that's all the time we have, but thank you very much for the information, and hopefully we'll get some folks taking part in these surveys.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
I've been talking with Andrew King of the OOIDA Foundation. We'll be back in just a moment with more of our program. Please stay with us. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Today's rising costs affect everyone. Replace your harmonic damper with a genuine Vibratech TVD viscous damper to prevent costly repairs and downtime. Keep your money in your pocket and your truck on the road with Vibratech TVD. Recommended replacement at 500,000 miles or 15,000 hours.
Ready to make more money? Use a better load board. For a limited time, get 50% off TruckStop Load Board Pro. Just go to truckstop.com/go and enter promo code READY2023 when you purchase Load Board Pro.
The best way to deal with a ticket when you're out on the road is to never get the ticket in the first place. You're listening to Landline Now, and I'm your host, Mark Redding. Welcome back to the program. Some tickets seem unavoidable, but others are easily avoided. Yet some of those avoidable tickets are amazingly common. I recently discussed the most easily avoided tickets with Alex Clark and David Grimes of CDL Legal. Our topic today is the most easily avoidable tickets, 3 to 7 common ticket types and how to avoid getting them. And the first one that you all mentioned was improper parking, which seems pretty obvious on the face, but maybe not. What is the most typical scenario here?
Well, Mark, you have drivers who pull off the side of the road or are on ramps, and most communities, most states now have made that illegal. Used to be you could do it, whether it was legal or not, and nobody really said anything. But we see that quite a bit. Or they're parking in, private property somewhere where they're not actually allowed to, and they get the police called on them. Improper parking is, it's avoidable. The good thing is it's non-moving. It's a fine. Basically, they're charging you a tax for parking improperly.
Are there places in the country where this happens more frequently than others?
I think it's happening all over. If you look at if you look at a lot of articles that have come out, it's like there's 10% parking spaces per over-the-road drivers. So it invariably it is going to happen. I mean, I know in where we are in Olathe, at one point they were looking to impose $1,000 fine because it was getting so bad. It's kind of like the outskirts of Kansas City, and it was a natural place for people to stop, but they were parking everywhere. That actually didn't go through, fortunately, but it's all over. There are just so many more drivers and the communities haven't made appropriate accommodations for them.
You mentioned it's a non-moving violation. How serious of a ticket is this?
It's not a serious ticket. It's a nuisance. It's a fine. It can be. I mean, we see $250 all the time for parking violations. You and I get a parking violation. It's $25 or something like that. But at least this is not one of those that's going to go on your license, as we were talking before, that's going to cause a suspension.
Okay. How to avoid this seems fairly obvious, but is there some trick to it that outside of just don't park in places like that?
Well, the trick is that you have trucking GPS. You know your hours. So you know approximately where you're going to be. So ahead of time, you look for places on your GPS that you can park. You don't wait till you got, 7 minutes and say, oh, I got to park or I'm going to go over my hours. That's really the way. I mean, that's the only way I see to prevent it, is know where you're going to park before. And then, of course, if it's all full, well, then, the game's on.
Okay. The second one that you mentioned is bypassing a way station. And again, it seems fairly obvious what this refers to, but what is the most typical scenario here?
Well,
are people deliberately doing this, or is this erroneous?
I think more often than not, the drivers just miss it. They miss the sign. Usually there are signs lit up that are telling you whether or not, the station is open. They misjudge how far they have to pass. So they get over somebody's going 50 and a 55, and they like want to get around them to save that extra 3 seconds, and then they miss it. And I'm sure then there is a percentage that are just going by purposely. And so that's a bad deal of way station. Now the officer has to chase you down if they decide to. And I can guarantee you, if they've chased you down and have to escort you back into the way station, you're going to get an inspection like nobody's business. I mean, this guy's going to spend all the time in the world because, frankly, he's angry. They don't like this. I do want to add in a different sort of bypassing way station, and that's ports of entry. Ports of entry are a whole bigger deal. You're coming into their state, and they have, it's just an automatic that you go in. Everyone should know it. Everyone should see it. And if you bypass a port of entry, especially in the western states, Nevada, Utah, California, we see a lot of this. I don't know why, but it's a misdemeanor. So it's a lot worse case. It's a lot more expensive. The attorneys have a lot more work to do, because think about it. If in this day and age, with all our border issues and the things that we're seeing, somebody comes through and bypasses a port of entry, that's kind of like, using the Rio Grande to come into the United States. So they take that very seriously.
I'm curious, you said it's a misdemeanor. I mean, is this something that could potentially involve jail time?
Well, I guess it depends what you have in your cargo and all that. But, yeah.
Right.
But yes, I think some of them do say up to a year in jail, but I've been doing this, 12, 13 years. I've never seen anybody go to jail for this. It's just the fines are higher. The courts are less likely to help you with this. So, and it just doesn't look good. I don't know. It's just dumb. Now, I realize there are times where drivers will say, well, I didn't see it, or there was a sign there, but it wasn't lit up. If you don't know, it takes you a few seconds to pull in and see nobody's there. And, because, that's one of the reasons why we say it's avoidable.
Okay. Third one is inoperative lights. Talk a little bit about that. I mean, again, it seems obvious what causes this or what the typical scenario is, but I'm curious how picky they get on this.
Well, think about this, particularly at night. That's really bad, and not even the headlights. But if your taillights aren't working, or on each truck at the top of front and back, they have those clearance lights, the little lights. They're like 5 across, so that people know they're coming up on a truck at night. But even during the day, turn signals, stop lamps, these are avoidable. Yes, anything can happen on the road. You're out there for 10 hours, or at some point stuff breaks. Why does it break? Because you used it. So but if you do your inspections, your pre-trip inspections, when you're getting gas, if you do, a walk around, make sure signals are on, put something on the brake, make sure the brakes lights are on. It's not completely avoidable, because turn signals go out. A lamp goes out at some point, and sometimes you don't find out about it until you've been pulled over. Again, this maintenance issue they don't consider it a moving violation, although they will put you out of service on an inspection if your brake lights aren't working or your headlights aren't working and it's at night. So it's a reasonably avoidable and kind of severe situation, because this really goes into the crash factor. If you can't see the truck's lights dimming when they're stopping, then next thing you know, you're right up there, and so it's kind of dangerous.
Okay. What is the number 4 most easily avoidable ticket?
Yeah, we really didn't put number 4 down on here, but this is my pet peeve. This is something that drives me absolutely insane. Drivers in California who are driving a CMV have a top speed anywhere, everywhere. I don't care. It's a 9-lane superhighway. Your speed is 55 miles an hour. And what happens is there are signs all over saying 75 mile an hour speed limit, except CMVs. There's a sign. I mean, I've been in California a lot. I like the West Coast near the beach, and I'm always noticing this. It's like boom, boom, and how the person sees the one and doesn't see the other is baffling to me. Which I think it's an excuse a lot of the time. We have drivers who work for companies in California, so they're driving in and out of California all the time, going, well, it said 75. I don't even know what to say to them. It's 55, and so if you're going 70 or 75, that's a huge ticket. That again puts you in risk of a misdemeanor. We don't see them write misdemeanors for 15 much. I think because they've just gotten so used to drivers somehow ignoring the actual speed limit. But anyway, it's completely avoidable. Drive 55 in California.
Alex, I'd like to follow up on that.
Sure.
And say that numbers-wise, the vast majority of California tickets that we see come through our system are speeding tickets.
Amen.
So it's not just that these are posted. It's not just that drivers are getting stopped. Sometimes colloquially, a driver may think, oh, I've never heard of anybody getting a speeding ticket, or, people said that they don't get stopped that much. But when you're standing from our perspective and you're seeing a broader scope, this is the violation that is being preferred, if you will, for officers who are stopping trucks. If you want to take a really cynical outlook and say that tickets are just so that municipalities, that this is how they're making their money. If you think about it the other way and say, okay, well, this is what the thing that's happening most, the violation that's happening the most in California and getting seen the most, it's still true. So it's a very real thing that drivers are constantly in jeopardy if they push their trucks past 55 in California.
Well, is there anything else you guys want to add on this topic, or any other tickets that you want to bring up for folks?
Yeah, I'll put in one more. We're seeing a ton of false log reports on inspections that are getting written tickets now. Again, avoidable. False logs. It means that you went over, or you're using PC, personal conveyance, in some outrageous way. Well, I was just trying to find parking and I had to go 150 miles toward my destination to find a place to park. It would be better for you to have just gotten a parking ticket. And so we do see that more and more and more. And it's completely avoidable. Just, have your trip planned out, know where you're going to need to end, assuming that nothing, interrupts your trip. And then you should be able to avoid those as well.
I've been talking with David Grimes and Alex Clark of CDL Legal, a legal services provider for the trucking industry, about the most easily avoided tickets. You can learn more by calling CDL Legal at 913-738-4836 or by going to their website, cdllegal.com. We'll be back in just a moment with more of our program. Please stay with us through a short commercial break. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Since you started, what you've loved about trucking is the freedom. Heading out on your favorite route, a good driving song, and thinking about truck insurance. Well, maybe not that last one. That's why we're here. At OOIDA, we have a full range of truck insurance products, expert advice, and great customer service, helping you get the right coverage for your operation. Go to OOIDA.com because your job is to drive. Our job is to help with everything else.
Welcome back to the program. A new law dedicated to cargo theft is now in effect in North Carolina. We're about to get into that with state legislative expert Keith Goebel of Landline Magazine, along with a bill that got the veto treatment in California by the governor there. Keith, thanks for joining us.
Scott, I'm very enticed to find out more about your teases here on these topics.
Well, I hope you know a lot more than I know about them. I guess we're going to find out here. This could be a wild ride.
We'll see what I can remember.
Let's start with what appears to be, and you'll tell us this hopefully, Keith, a new law in North Carolina in direct response to the rise in cargo theft cases we've seen nationwide, really. North Carolina clearly dealing with the problem as well, like other states. Only they're doing something about it here, Keith, and beefing up punishments.
Yeah, something that the OOIDA says is any type of cargo theft deterrence. It's definitely overdue everywhere. But yeah, North Carolina taking action here with legislation that was signed into law not too long ago with a December 1st effective date. And it is to, ramp up in an effort to deter, but ramp up punishments for those folks who engage in that type of activity, whether it is taking property from a trailer, any type of motor vehicle. This new law, the rules apply to even a railroad car, aircraft. I mean, it among others. I mean, just about everything is covered, I believe, in this pursuit. North Carolina, until now, no matter how much someone might steal in cargo, it has been a felony, but the value of the goods that are taken, it doesn't really matter. I mean, someone who is found and convicted, they would face up to 24 months in prison. And for state lawmakers, the belief has been here this year is that that's not enough. We've got to put in more of a deterrent. So they've approved, and the governor has signed into law, as I mentioned, is now in effect. But it has 4 tiers of punishment.
And they all depend really on, as you kind of mentioned there, how much you steal over, I think, a 90-day period across the state, right? So you mentioned the 24 months as leading up to December 1st was the punishment, or up to 24 months, I guess, in prison. How steep are the fines now? It looks like they're pretty steep for people who steal a lot of stuff.
Yeah, as I mentioned, there's 4 tiers. I guess the first tier, if you've got stolen cargo, it's valued between just over $1,500 and $20,000. The violator would face up to 39 months in prison. The fourth tier, the maximum tier, is if stolen cargo is valued and it's beyond $100,000, then the offender would face up to 230 months in prison. Now, for those folks, if they have a theft of goods that's valued at $1,500 or less, the punishment would remain that 24 months in prison, which has been, the standard no matter what the value has been, up till, again, the first of this month.
Yeah, we're talking, more than 19 years possibly in prison if you're caught with that at that upper tier, as you mentioned there. We've talked a lot in recent months about how bad the cargo theft issue, the problem has become nationwide. North Carolina, as I said, not immune to this problem there. Do we know just how bad the problem is in North Carolina and kind of why they took action here?
Yeah, and as you would expect, any providing good information to lawmakers while this bill was making its way through the State House. I mean, to have some statistics or at least some overall figures definitely helped to prove the point. Yeah, North Carolina, there were in 2022 alone, there were nearly 3,000 individuals there in the state that were charged with that Class 1 felony for 24 months in prison related to cargo theft. So yeah, it's a good number. If you consider a good number to be really high number. But yeah, North Carolina ranks in the top 10. I've seen that figure, top 10 nationwide as far as states with cargo theft. So among the highest rates. And yeah, I mean, and you think of nationally what CargoNet has put out just in the third quarter of 2023 nationally. There were about 700 events across the U.S. and Canada, and that's more than a 50% increase year over year. So comparing it to, third quarter of 2022, so something that has only been getting worse, and I think the expectation is, without putting North Carolina's case, without putting in some additional deterrent as far as possible prison time, they're hopeful that will be somewhat of a deterrent.
Yeah, let's see if this makes a difference there, and let's see if other states follow suit to clamp down on the problem in their own states as well. We'll keep an eye on that. Let's move on to California now. The legislature there in Sacramento recently passing a bill that is related to entry-level driver training programs, but Governor Gavin Newsom has vetoed it. Let's start with what the bill was trying to do here.
Yeah. Well, the legislation is to provide what is called Cal Grant C. I don't know if we'll get into the full definition, but that's what would be applied here. But provide this grant eligibility to provincial truck drivers, those who are, they're wanting to, they're aspiring truck drivers, but, they're needing to go through CDL training and of course, those requirements, the costs quite significant. So this legislation wanting to provide that grant eligibility to those drivers. The amount of time that if you're going to go through truck driving a school to get your license, it's less than 4 months. Yeah. And financial aid is not available for those prospective drivers because it has to be, for federal financial aid, it's not available for vocational programs, which are less than 10 months. And as far as for the state, a program that lasts less than 4 months, it's ineligible for aid. So this Cal Grant C kind of falls in between there. That would allow the application of again those prospective drivers to have that eligibility.
So that's what legislators were trying to do and actually passed right through the legislature. But Governor Gavin Newsom vetoed it. Did he give a reason as to why or what problem he has with all this?
That's a great question, Scott. Thanks for asking. Yeah, no, the governor, as is typical with any veto, they're generally, especially like an issue like this, they're going to provide some explanation as far as why they acted on that. And worth pointing out, the legislation went through the State House unanimously. Nobody voted in opposition to it. So yeah, why would the governor go against this, especially whenever you've got the State House, both chambers led by the same party as the governor. So, exactly why would the governor not have gone along with this? And his issue with it was financial concerns that the state has if they were to make this change. And as was pointed out by Governor Newsom, the legislation includes significant general fund cost for the state, and then you've got some staff workload that was a concern that wasn't part of the state's fiscal plan. So he didn't like where the money was coming from to get it taken care of. Not that he doesn't like the idea, but how it was going to be financed. Definitely something I would expect lawmakers to revisit in 2024 with a different funding source.
Yeah, sounds like there's some common ground there that they can find. Keith, you had all the answers. You passed the test. We appreciate it as always. We'll see you next time.
All right, thanks.
That's our program for today. You can get the latest updates from the trucking industry at landline.media 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And we'll see you right back here on Landline Now tomorrow. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
I'm a dad.
A son.
A husband.
Wife.
I'm a writer.
Photographer.
I farm.
I'm a veteran.
I love old cars. Fishing.
My kids.
Chrome.
And I am
a professional truck driver.
And together we are OOIDA.
OOIDA was founded by truckers to stand up and speak on behalf of truckers. We've done that by combining the individual voices of our members into a single, powerful voice. Protecting your interests, defending your rights.
Join us! Make your voice heard. Join OOIDA, the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. Call 1-800-444-5791 or visit OOIDA.com.